So one of the most formational authors, theologians that's spoken into my life was a guy by the name of Dallas Willard, who wrote some incredible books in the 90s and early 2000s. One of the best books was called The Divine Conspiracy. If you're looking for a great book to help you grow in your faith, it'd be an awesome read. But he says this in the side of that book, The Divine Conspiracy. It's going to help us as we jump into this conversation this morning, that familiarity breeds unfamiliarity. Familiarity breeds unfamiliarity. In other words, sometimes you can be around something so much and think that you understand it so well that it creates unfamiliarity, and you have more blind spots because you're around something for so long. Familiarity, it breeds unfamiliarity. We understand this, right, in marriages and relationships. If you've been with that same person for many years, being so close to them, the familiarity can create unfamiliarity. You start to check out on the details about what makes the person tick. You start to not pay as close of attention as you used to because you're around that person all the time. Sometimes in my life this happens in popular music. I'm not really up on the most popular music, but every now and again there is a song, like the song of the summer, something that just breaks the cultural consciousness and where it's all you can hear for a whole year is that song. I feel like 2020 was that song, Old Town Road. So I heard that song all over the place all the time, but I was hearing the lyrics wrong. I was so just inoculated with it. I swear he was saying, "Take my horse to the hotel room," and I'm a hotel room. What's everybody talking about? You're never going to get your security deposit back. You take a horse into a hotel room, not going to work out. It was actually saying Old Town Road, but it's something you just hear it so often you can be inoculated to what is really being said, and this plays out in so many different avenues of our life. I think that it's so true in church with Christianity and the person of Jesus as well. You can be around Jesus, you can hear about Jesus, sing about Jesus, hear the stories about Jesus so much, you become so familiar with Jesus that it can create unfamiliarity to where you have all these blind spots about who Jesus is. I think this can happen if you're new to church. We're so glad that you're here, but you live in the Midwest, the Bible Belt part of the country, to where the sort of Jesus and stories about Jesus are just kind of in the air, right? Maybe you grew up in church and you were like me and kind of born into a pew where you're there all the time, and you can be so inoculated with the stories of Jesus that you're starting to miss some of the beautiful diamond that the life of Jesus, the person of Jesus really is. So I think it's good practice for me, and therefore it's probably going to be what we do as a church, to have every couple months to have sort of a rediscovery of Jesus, to look at Jesus with new eyes, with a fresh lens, so that we're never just, oh, it's Jesus, but we're always scandalized by the person of Jesus. We're always disoriented in a holy way to this Savior, this Rabbi who invites us to follow him with our lives. So that's what we're going to do through the month of November. We're going to, hopefully, I've been praying that for you guys and for us, we would all be disoriented to the person of Jesus, where we'd see him in a new way and marvel at him in a new way and be struck with wonder at him in a new way. And we're going to do that through a different kind of lens. We're going to talk about how Jesus was human and the humanity of Jesus all month here at the church. But as we dive into this conversation about the humanity of Jesus, let me ask you this. Have you ever had a perception of a person in your life or in culture, and then you see them in a different situation and it kind of blows up your perception, it disorients you because you see this person wait, you're my 8th grade science teacher, what are you doing at the mall? You need some test tubes and you just need to be wearing goggles, right? You can't go to the mall. We have those experiences, right? That can happen to us often with celebrities. Here's a picture right here of two of the most famous actors of our time, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. This is a still from probably my favorite movie of all time, Good Will Hunting from 1997, I believe. Some of the Gen Z in the room are they made movies in 1997? Oh. Well, yeah, they might look much younger here. How you like them apples? Good Will Hunting. Here's another picture of Ben Affleck, who it's him as Batman in the couple recent DC movies, Batfleck, as they refer to him lovingly online. But he kind of looks as the prototypical movie star, right? He just kind of has that look. Looks like he is split through the consciousness of our culture, where he's other. He's this movie star kind of guy, which makes it really funny when you find pictures or memes online of Ben Affleck doing very human, normal things, right? I mean, he's wearing the bat suit here, but here's a picture of him probably outside of his house just exasperated. Like, this is the look that I have when we just clean the toy room and I hear the Mega Blocks hit the ground again. Here we go. Sans the cigarette. This is what I'm doing in this moment. This is the face that I make when I hear the Blippi theme song again. And if you don't know who Blippi is, praise God. Big part of my life right now, that Blippi character. Blippi! Anyway, so I understand what Ben Affleck is going through in this moment. Here's another experience that I saw online. This is Ben Affleck trying to pick up all of his Dunkin' Donuts order at once because he's just like me. Like, we have to just take one trip, right, guys? You have to do it all in one trip. But then I love the progression. You see this. He's picking it up. It's all following. And then the last shot is sort of the Sasquatch shot of, like, he sees he's on camera, and it's so embarrassing. And we've all been there, but it's kind of funny to see the person that gets to dress up in the bat suit make a mess and drop all of their Dunkin' Donuts stuff. It's disorienting because we think these people are beyond the normal, benign human activities that you and I go through every single day. And I think the same thing is true of Jesus in a much more important way. I think the same thing is true with Jesus, that we have a picture of Jesus in our minds, often in the American Western church, that is only a portion of who Jesus really is. And I think we need to take a wider lens look, or maybe we need to dive into other elements of his life so that we don't get inoculated with the power and the scandal of who Jesus is. So that's what we're going to be doing this month, looking at Jesus, this Jesus that I never knew growing up. So for me growing up, I was sort of always given this picture of Jesus, like either if it was a painting, he kind of looked like Kevin Costner. Here's like the latest picture that I saw. This was from the Jesus or the Bible TV show a couple years ago. And it's just like so awkward because he's so handsome. I mean, look at the hair. Like, man, the desert's doing really good things for his hair, right? He's so handsome. He's very white. Like, can we just talk about that? Like, this Jesus is very white, when in reality, he was nothing like this. Like, this is the type of Jesus that I feel like is the caricature of, like, he always talks really soft-spoken like this. Like, when he comes up upon sinners, he's like, what in the name of me is going on? But in reality, that's just not the picture that we really get in the Gospels of who Jesus is. Actually, forensic scientists have done some great work trying to understand what Jesus actually looks like, and this is their depiction using computer technology. This is more like what Jesus looked like than a white man who's so handsome. And this should scandalize us a little bit, right? This should like disorient us a little bit. My friends, Jesus was a man who was born in the Middle East. He was a Middle Eastern man. He was a Jewish man. He was a carpenter by trade. So he had calluses. He probably had bruises. He was a working class guy. Jesus throughout his life was a refugee. Jesus was a revolutionary, and Jesus was a rabbi who other young Jewish men were invited to come and follow after him. He's so much more than the Kevin Costner, white, handsome Jesus that we're handed. And this can be disorienting to us, but this is more like what Jesus looked like than what we usually are handed. Actually, the prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew scriptures in our Old Testament said this about the Messiah's looks. They said there would be nothing about him that would have been attractive in his appearance. Isn't that crazy how like we see like Jesus with the sash looking like he just won Mr. America or something like that in all our depictions, but like nothing about him was attractive. He was a normal, ordinary guy, and nothing in his appearance was attractive. But here we are in 2021 still talking about this Jewish rabbi who rose from the dead. Isn't that amazing? But this can be disorienting to us about how we see Jesus and what we think of when we think about the picture of who Jesus is. You know, there's a lot of people, I have some friends that aren't Christians that I love dearly, that they look at Jesus and they say, well, Jesus was just a man. I mean, he was an incredible example. I mean, his teachings were so amazing. He was a guy who stood up and for the little guy and always fought against systems of oppression and things like that. Like they think Jesus was incredible, but he was just a man. There's some people in our culture that are just comfortable thinking about him as just a man. I think most church people in the American world, in the Western world, we don't think of him as a man. We go to the other extreme and we only think of Jesus as this superhuman, divine being. I mean, we think about the way that Jesus walked, and we're told and taught that Jesus lived a sinless life, which means that he never had an interaction with another human being where he was like trying to own them or trying to belittle them or try to get something from them. He never sinned. He didn't even like think bad thoughts about the person in the cubicle next to them. Like, no, he never did that kind of thing, which feels so superhuman. Not only that, but Jesus went to a cross and he died this substitutionary death. This cosmic thing happened where he gave forgiveness to all people that would trust him from his death. And then he rose again from the dead. I mean, this sounds like superhuman stuff. And so many of us are just comfortable talking about Jesus as this God, this divinity that it was like basically had a human mask on when he was on earth, but he's so other, so divine, so holy. We just sang over here. The reality is, and it's a challenge for me, and it's a challenge for us as people that are in a church this morning, even if you don't consider yourself a church person. But the reality is, if Jesus is just this superhuman deity, we've got some problems. If Jesus is just a superhuman deity, then I can't relate to him very well. He's like an alien. He's like a Marvel superhero who has these abilities and things that I could admire, but I could never emulate because I don't have the superpower. I'm not an alien, right? And that's a problem for us because Jesus tells us to follow him, to imitate him, to be his apprentice, right? It's a problem because when we go through the struggles and the pain of life and this beautiful but broken experience that we call life, man, if Jesus was just superhuman and he was just God, then he doesn't know what we experience. He doesn't know what it's like. He can't empathize with us at all. If Jesus is just a superhuman, we've got some problems, and there's not this beauty attached to the Christian story that we are invited to trust and follow as well. But here is the truth I want to lead us to throughout this series, and especially this morning as we're just kicking off this idea of Jesus being human, is that you don't have to stay over here and think, well, Jesus was just God and he's divine. He's like the alien superhuman. You don't have to go over here, and I hope you don't go over here to where you see God or you see Jesus just as this great man who lived. Actually, the Christian tradition and the church fathers and people that have gone before us have understood this beautiful theological principle that grabs both sides, and it's called the hypostatic union. Who's pumped to talk about the hypostatic union? Just Joel. No, but anyway, we're going to get nerdy here. As one person down front's excited about it too. But here's the reality. We're going to talk about this theological teaching, this doctrine that is so powerful and it has such huge implications for our life. But we got to get nerdy for a little bit to talk about it. It's called the hypostatic union. In AD 451, some church leaders from the known world where Christianity was got together at what was called the Chalcedonian Council, which sounds like, let's get ready to rumble, the Chalcedonian Council. And they got together and they were trying to, hey, we need to really understand who was Jesus. Was Jesus just like an angel? Was Jesus just a man that God chose? Like, who was Jesus? So they did the math. They went and they got to the scriptures and they reasoned together and they came out with what's called the Chalcedonian Creed, which leads us to the hypostatic union. In bare bones, in layman's terms, the hypostatic union teaches us this, that God, or that Jesus was 100% God. He was 100% divine. But at the same time, he was 100% man. He was 100% human. He wasn't 25% God, 75% man. He wasn't 50-50. No, he was 100% God and 100% human at the same time. Actually, inside of the Chalcedonian Creed, it says this: his two natures, Jesus' two natures, divinity and humanity, are without confusion, without change, without division, and without separation. Jesus is one. The hypostatic union teaches us that Jesus is the full God-man, 100% God and 100% human. As Andy Stanley says, God in a bod, right? This is what the hypostatic union teaches us. I think, in just a way to try to explain it, like if we were all 5-year-olds, because this is how I need it sometimes. You guys seen these things online, these pictures where you're like, is this a duck or is it a rabbit? What do you guys see? Both, right? It's how wherever you're starting your eyes looking, right? There's a duck and a rabbit. Somebody was a smart aleck in the first service. They're like, that's not a duck, Bill. Like, don't think about it too technically here. But both things are happening in the same way, but in a much richer way. When we look at the person of Jesus, we see full divinity and full humanity on display. No division, no conflict between the two. And so here's a question you should be asking. Why does the hypostatic union matter? Why does this doctrine, this theological statement and teaching, why does it actually matter? And here's where we're going this morning as we talk about Jesus being human. And this is why it matters for us as we follow him in our lives. We'll put it this way right here. In Jesus' divinity, he shows us what God is like. This is a little sidebar here. If you want to know what God is like, if you're questioning the character of God, who is this God that church is all about, that the Bible's this story about, like, who is this God? If you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. The Apostle Paul tells us in Colossians 1 that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is what God has to say. Jesus is 100% what God is like. If you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. And in Jesus' divinity, he shows us this. It's really powerful stuff. But then, in Jesus' humanity, remember, 100% humanity as well, he shows us what it means to be truly human. I hear often people talk about people passing away, and and we say it in good intentions, and I understand why we get there, but people are like, well, heaven just needed another angel, or people saying things like, well, I'm just not an angel yet, and things like this, and that's a whole other talk for another time, because we don't become angels, and that's a whole other thing we could talk about. But the reality is, the invitation of Jesus in your life is not to become some kind of angelic creature to live in the new heavens and the new earth or live up in heaven. The goal and the thrust and the throw of the Christian life is to become truly human. And it's a beautiful invitation. It's not a slight, but to be truly human is to live out your full identity as a man or a woman created in the image of God. That is what true humanity is. And so Jesus is showing us, as we look at him being a human being, what it really looks like to be truly human, to never forget our identity, never live in a different narrative, but live in the story, live in the narrative that we are created as good human beings made in the image of our God. And so as we look at Jesus' humanity, he shows us how to live. He's the prototype for us to thrive and to flourish and to be his people in 2021 and beyond, which is so beautiful and so powerful. But I can tell from the blank faces that I'm looking at, you're not convinced yet, so we're going to dive deeper, okay? So here's where we're going. We got to understand, and we're talking this morning about Jesus' humanity, that the early church understood this. Paul, who was writing to these little gatherings of Jesus followers in the ancient world, he wrote one letter to a church in a place called Philippi. And Paul's actually in prison as he's writing this letter, but he's writing this letter of encouragement. It's a short book in the New Testament, really awesome stuff. But in Philippians chapter 2, in this letter that Paul's writing, he gives us an example of what the early church believed about the hypostatic union, and it believed about Jesus being fully divine and fully human. And what's really cool about the passage we're going to look at, most Bible scholars believe that this was a song that Jesus followers would gather around and they would sing together. Songs sometimes, like we sing on Sunday mornings, they remind us of what's true. In a world that's so busy and chaotic, we're pulled back to what's true and we're centered again. And most scholars believe that what we're going to look at is one of the very first songs that early Jesus followers would sing together. Now, we look at it in English. It does not rhyme at all, but that's another story for another time. It's in a different language, a different time. Anyway, we're going to look at Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 5. This is what Paul tells these early Jesus followers, and he tells us today. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. In your relationships, in your relational world, your horizontal world, have the same mindset. Think like Jesus. Now, there's a little note we need to pick up here is that Paul thinks that we can be like Jesus. Paul thinks that we can think like Jesus. He doesn't think that Jesus is just so superhuman. We can never do it. We should admire those qualities, but we can never live it out. No, he says you can think like Jesus and have a mindset like Jesus in your relationships because he's a fully God and he's fully human. He goes on, he starts to tease out this idea and breaks into the song right here. He says this, Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Now, a couple things we need to pick up here. Paul is saying here that Jesus is God. There's never been a time that Jesus was not God. Jesus, whatever makes God God, Jesus has got that quality. He's got that as well. So Jesus is God, being in the very nature God. But then we're told this, he didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. In other words, Jesus never walked into a room and played the God card. Like, he walks into the local Jewish pub and he's like, hey, round for me and the guys because look at me, I'm Jesus. Like he never did that. He's never like asking for the nicest table in the room. He's never like walking into the room and asking everybody to bow down before him. Actually, it's the opposite. Jesus never played the God card. He always was running to the back of the line. He was showing a different way to be human as a servant. So what we're told here is that even though Jesus was 100% God and he was the most important person in every room he ever walked into, he never played the God card and played it to his advantage, ever. How beautiful is that? How challenging is that? How challenging is that to us as we get older and as we make more money or we have a more impressive title and have more toys? Isn't it true that so often we want to play that, well, I was there younger, but now I paid my dues and now I deserve this, right? We can treat people like we're more important than them. Jesus never did that, which that's a sidebar, but that's just a challenging thought to me, right? So he continues on. Paul's teasing out this thought more about the hypostatic union. He says he didn't use this nature of God to his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Now, the phrase I have highlighted there, he made himself nothing, is actually the Greek word, it's a Greek verb, kanoo. On the count of three, just because we need a little bit of Greek this morning, can we just all say kanoo together? 1, 2, 3, kanoo. And in its most literal translation, kanoo means to empty oneself of, to empty of. Now, there's a couple things that we need to understand here that can get a little confusing with emptying oneself of something. It's not like when Jesus became man that he got rid of his divinity. I mean, Paul already told us that Jesus has divinity. Jesus has always been God. There was never a time when Jesus wasn't God. But when you look at the verb kanoo and the other places where it's found in the New Testament, which is 4 other places, we see that it's not like when you kanoo, when you empty oneself, it's not like that quality disappears. It's kind of like you set it aside and you don't use it to your own advantage. It's like Jesus was always God and he made himself nothing. He emptied himself of his divine privileges, but it was all right there. It was all a part of him. He just didn't tap into it in a full way. So Jesus has always been God, but again, his posture towards us was that he made himself nothing. He didn't consider himself to be more important. He emptied himself. He made himself nothing of his divine privileges so that he could become like a servant. Jesus didn't just become a human being, but he went to the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of the totem pole to live a servant life where he had no rights, he had no property, he didn't have wealth, he didn't have any air of superiority over anybody else, but he was a servant at all times. This is how God entered the world. So, Jesus is God. He's always been God, but he lived his life as a human being and he didn't consider his divine privilege something that he could play as the God card all the time. He just never did that. This is the hypostatic union. This is God, or Jesus being God and human 100% at the same time. And you guys, as we study the life of Jesus, as we look at the Gospels, these ancient biographies that are recorded for us in our Bibles, we see Jesus' humanity on full display. And I just want to put a magnifying glass on it for a couple minutes this morning because Jesus can connect with you in your life because he was 100% human. So we go to the very beginning of the Gospels, the very beginning of the story, and we can't forget Christmas, right? Jesus was born as a human baby, giggling, dribbling, crying, kind of like crying that I'm used to in my house right now, the scream crying. Jesus did that kind of thing. I mean, what does this say about how God entered into the human story, you guys? That he decided to come as a vulnerable, helpless baby. I mean, our Thomas, who's about 8 months now, I mean, it was 3 or 4 months in, he couldn't lift and hold his head up. His neck wasn't strong enough. He was that vulnerable. And what does this say that Jesus came into the world like this? Jesus couldn't feed himself. He couldn't change himself. He was a little baby. Jesus was human, and he entered in the story not on accident this way, but on purpose to show us something about the frailty that he lowered himself into. Again, he didn't enter into the story like, Father God, beam me down to earth like Star Trek. No, he entered in this crazy way at Christmas. He was born a human baby. Not only that, as he gets older, the Gospels show us that Jesus actually grew as a young boy, as a teenager. Jesus had a human mind that increased in wisdom over time. As he grew, he had a human mind that he understood new things. There's this passage that I'm referencing here is when Jesus is in the temple and he's talking to different rabbis and asking questions about the scriptures with them because he didn't know everything. It's not like Jesus came into the human story with everything pre-programmed and downloaded on his head where he's 2 years old explaining the deepest parts of the Trinity and deepest miracles in the world. No, he had to grow and he had to learn things. I mean, isn't this a scandalous idea? That many of you guys that know like some math, you know more right now than Jesus did at some point in his life? Because Jesus, some of you, if you know math, some of you are like, I also got nothing there. That's what somebody was thinking there. But Jesus had to learn and he had to grow and he had to understand and discover new things. I love this quote right here. I thought this is so powerful when we talk about this. This is Greg Howe, who wrote a great book called Fully Human about Jesus. He said, the Almighty God chose to become a vulnerable, weak, fully dependent newborn who didn't even know how to walk, talk, or do basic addition or subtraction. And at least half of you guys can do 2/3 of the math here, right? This is an idea that we see that God chose to enter in our story this way as a human being, a fully human being. And that should be scandalous to us. That should like wake some wonder in our hearts and in our minds about it. We continue on in the story and we see Jesus felt things that you and I feel. Jesus got hungry. We're told that Jesus fasted into the desert for 40 days and he spoke about how he was hungry. He felt hunger pangs. We're told multiple places that Jesus, from his travels, he was thirstier. When he was on the cross, he said that he thirsted. Those feelings that you feel, those very human feelings that don't feel spiritual to you at all, Jesus felt those things. He felt hunger. He knew what it was like to miss a meal, miss many meals. He knew what it was like to feel his throat dry, parched from not experiencing drink. He felt those things, which leads me to a deep theological question. If Jesus was hungry and thirsty, was he ever hangry? And if he was hangry, he couldn't be hangry at anybody. He had to be hangry at hunger itself. I don't know because you know how that all works. But anyway, Jesus got hungry and thirsty, and I'll do a whole blog series on hangry about Jesus being hangry later, I guess. But anyway, he felt other things too. He felt this. Jesus needed to rest from traveling. Jesus was weary from traveling. I mean, I know that I've done a day of like flying when you get on a couple planes and or sometimes you do like a long road trip and you get to the end of your trip and you're like, man, I'm so exhausted from traveling. And we were just sitting on our butts all day. Like it's the weirdest thing. But Jesus actually felt tired from traveling and he would be walking and he didn't have orthopedic shoes in the desert. He was wearing some terrible sandals, but he would walk and travel and he felt exhausted from his traveling just like you and I would as well. There's this other quote I think is so powerful about these really human things that Jesus felt. A New Testament scholar who wrote some great commentaries on the Gospels, Craig Evans, he said this: it's almost as though a lot of Christians think of Jesus as God wearing a human mask. I mean, he's sort of faking it, pretending to be human. He pretends to perspire or sweat. His stomach only appears to gurgle because, of course, he's not really hungry. In fact, we think he doesn't need to eat. So Jesus is the bionic Son of God who isn't really human. So often we can tend to believe these kind of things like Jesus is just faking this humanity thing. But in reality, Jesus was 100% human all the time, just like he was 100% God all the time. He also felt the full range of emotions. We're told in the Gospels multiple times that Jesus cried. Jesus wept. We see here when his friend Lazarus died. When Lazarus died, Jesus, he wept at this death. He was so just distraught over the loss and the grief that he experienced. We're told that he weeps and he cries before he enters into Jerusalem because of the state of the city of God. He was just so distraught and so broken over what was happening inside of the city. So Jesus wept. Hear this, men specifically. Jesus was a man who was fully in touch with his feelings, which is a different kind of masculinity. I'll call it a true masculinity. And the counterfeit masculinity that we're told is like, oh, just toughen up. You're not supposed to feel anything. Like, that's stuff for women and girls. Like, that's counterfeit masculinity. Don't ever buy what the culture is selling, saying that men shouldn't feel deeply and be in touch with their feelings. Can amen to that, somebody out there? Like, Jesus was a true man, true masculinity, and he felt deeply, and he wept. He cried in different ways. We see this, that Jesus got angry. We see this all over the scriptures, that Jesus wasn't the happy-go-lucky kind of hippie guy, but there were things that ticked him off. I mean, there is one element, it's found here in Matthew 21 if you want to look it up later, but Jesus walks into the temple, where it's this place where heaven is meeting earth and people are supposed to have access to God, and Jesus sees that there are people blocking access to God there that were money changers and making sure that people that didn't have a lot of money or were foreigners couldn't get close to the presence of God, and Jesus goes like full Tony Soprano, like a mob boss, and he comes in, we're told he flips tables, we're told he like swipes all the money off of the tables. One account in the Gospel of Luke, I believe, says he makes a whip and he like drives people out of the temple. I mean, like, he's not a happy guy, right? He is really, truly ticked off at injustice, at people blocking access to God. But Jesus got angry just like you and I get angry. He experienced that. We're told this as well, that Jesus felt anxiety and fear. On the night that Jesus was arrested, we're told that he's so full of anxiety. The scriptures tell us that his heart was troubled. And he's so stressed over what he needs to experience as he goes to the cross that he's sweating blood, which is actually a real medical thing that can happen when you are so overwhelmed with anxiety and stress and fear. So we just spent the last 3 weeks talking about mental health and mental illness. And so another sidebar here, just so you don't miss this, that if you feel anxiety, if it's crippling you, if you feel in any way, shape, or form that fear is driving your life and it's in the driver's seat of your life, I want you to know that you have a Savior in Jesus who felt those exact same things. So you are not spiritually deficient. You are not broken or less than other people. But your Savior, Jesus, he experienced anxiety and fear just like you do. And that should mean something to us. And then to cap everything off with Jesus' life is his death, that Jesus died a human death. Jesus knew there was no way to fully experience and have solidarity with humankind unless he went all the way. And his death was more than just a human death. It was a cosmic act that changed all of history forever and brought freedom and hope and forgiveness to everyone who would trust him. And it was a gruesome death. It wasn't a falling asleep and never waking up kind of death, was it? No, it was him at the cross. His heart literally breaking, his lungs giving out from being hung up on a cross with stakes driven between his hands and his feet, suffocating to his last breath. Jesus felt that. So he has solidarity with the human death that we all fear, experience in our lives. He understood that no one's getting out of here alive. He felt that deeply. This is who Jesus was, you guys. Jesus was 100% human. And so why does this matter to all of us? Why should this matter? Why should this be something we need to talk about? There are 3 implications I want to give us. Why I think this matters to the rest of your day, the way that you live your life. 3 implications that have some challenges inside them. The first is this, and maybe this is just for me, but man, this speaks so deeply. I couldn't get around not talking about this morning. Jesus' full humanity and full divinity brings us a wonder that truly satisfies our souls. Jesus being fully God and fully man, it wakes something in me to wonder and awe that nothing else would really satisfy my soul. I mean, think about the poetry of it, you guys. Think about the reality that Jesus, who has all authority, sitting in the splendor of heaven, he didn't just write to us about how much he loves us. He didn't just like send down an angel or a representative. But no, God in the Son Jesus came to earth, is born as a baby, as a child, as a vulnerable person, and experienced everything that we could have experienced. He went to such deep lengths to show me, to show you that he loves us and he wants to bring us into his hope, into his family, into his mission. And you know what? I can spend a lot of time talking about other world religions and their stories and about holy men that we should follow. But man, nothing else speaks to my soul. Like, not a God who's alien to me or just a man who had some good things to say, but the true God man who came after me, pursued me, chased me. I mean, it doesn't leave me with a lot of analytics that I can run, but it speaks to my soul deeply. It satisfies my soul like no other story could. And I know that's not really practical, but maybe for you, you're in a season of your faith where you feel like you're not really struck with wonder or awe. Man, it would challenge you to gaze at this truth that Jesus is fully God and fully human, and he came after you. He left his divine privileges. He put it to the side to be a servant to you. Oh, what can speak deeper to our souls, right? Sorry, I can't move off of that quickly this morning because it just speaks to me so deeply. Next, here's another implication. That Jesus' full humanity means he understands what we're going through. He understands what you are going through. You've got mental health challenges. You've got relationship challenges. Jesus experienced it all. Jesus felt fear. He felt anxiety. He felt those things. In relationships, Jesus was betrayed by one of his closest friends. And as soon as he died, when he rose again, all of his disciples had already moved on past him and they were hiding in a room somewhere because they were fearful they were next. Jesus knows what it means to be betrayed. Jesus knows what it means to be let down. He understands this. He understands what you're going through. And that should challenge us and it should move us in deep ways. I've spoken about this before, but I lost my father in 2015, and he was 61 years old. He's too young. He was sick for a long time. And so we sort of knew that he wasn't going to live very long, but the last 48 hours were so fast. I felt like I should have been prepared for it, but I just wasn't. And actually, I don't think any of us are really ever prepared for losing a parent. But inside of what happened, I remember saying goodbye to him in the ICU room. And I just fell. My legs stopped working. I just fell to this dirty hospital floor, and my legs just left, and I just fell down, and I was weeping. I was sobbing. I was so upset. I just felt like I didn't get enough time. I didn't say all I wanted to say. I wanted to meet my kids, all these things that I was feeling lost in this moment. And it was hard. The next couple days, I didn't feel any better. People grieve in different ways. Some people love to celebrate and have this kind of defiant joy. And I didn't really have that naturally. I was just sad. I was broken over the whole thing. And I remember it was a couple weeks later, I was in church and somebody was teaching about Jesus weeping at the loss of his friend Lazarus. That Jesus sobbed. The actual Jewish word was he kind of screamed out in grief. And something about the poetry of that, something about understanding that this Jesus, he empathizes with what I felt in the darkest thing that I'd ever experienced up until that point in my life. He saw me in it, and he understood what it felt like. Man, it gave me this peace. It gave me this closeness to Jesus to where in my darkest moment, I didn't walk farther away from Jesus, but I was drawn like a bug to a light more of the person of Jesus. Because he understood what I was going through. He experienced it. I hope you know that in all of your challenges, that Jesus in his full humanity, he can empathize with you. He was there. He felt it. He saw it. He sees you. He feels what you're going through. He's not distant from you in it. And lastly, the last implication I want to leave us with is this, that Jesus' full humanity means that we can follow him, that we can truly follow him. Following a rabbi in the first century, where a rabbi would come around to some young Jewish boys and he would say these Hebrew words, lek akarai, lek hakarai. And lek akarai meant come and follow me. And come follow me wasn't just hey, follow after me, just run in my crew. No, it was saying this. Lek akarai was, I believe you can do what I can do. I think you can imitate me. You can live out this life that I live. You can do what I can do. My friends, because Jesus is fully human, he shows us what it looks like to be truly human. He shows us what it looks like to grow spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Because Jesus is fully human, he can lead us to resist the temptations that we face in life, because Jesus faced temptation as well. Because Jesus is fully human, he calls us to follow his example and to do the things that he did, to live the way that he lived. And you know what? We can. And this is where we're going for the rest of the series. We're going to look at Jesus in his humanity, being the true human being, and how we can follow him, how we can imitate him, and how we can be like Jesus so that we can become truly human as well. Again, this is the bottom line I want to leave us with today. We already said it once, we'll say it again. That in Jesus' divinity, he shows us what God is like, and in Jesus' humanity, he shows us what it means to be truly human. So let me say this. Maybe you feel stuck in your life. Maybe you feel dry in your spiritual growth and you feel like, I just kind of run through the motions. Man, this is a series for you. This is something that is going to challenge you as we look at Jesus as the prototype for us to be truly human. This is going to challenge you. So I have a challenge for each and every one of you over this next 3 weeks as we go through this series. I want to challenge you to be here every single Sunday. I want to challenge you to commit to be here, to go on this journey of rediscovering Jesus with us, and bring your kids so they get incredible age-appropriate discipleship and learning about Jesus and Bridgeway Kids, but be here every week of this series. Commit to be on this investigative journey with us as we look at the humanity of Jesus and how he's a prototype, he's a model for us to follow to be truly human. I want to challenge you to do that. If you feel stuck, man, I want to really encourage you to do that. If you want to not go into a season of boredom with Jesus, man, I want to encourage you to be here with us on this journey, because he's going to teach us how to be truly human by us investigating his true humanity. Sound good? Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to be on this journey together. You guys, let's never get inoculated with the wonder and the scandal and the beauty and the invitation of Jesus. I'll never get my whole head around it. And that's an awesome thing. And he's inviting us to chase after him in the same way.